The sun was setting over the sprawling estate of Robert and Lillian Whitmore, casting a golden glow on the manicured lawns and ivy-covered mansion. To the outside world, the Whitmores were the epitome of success and happiness, a power couple with wealth, influence, and an unshakable bond. Robert was a renowned businessman who had built his empire from scratch, while Lillian was the picture of elegance and poise, a regular at high society events. But behind the pristine facade, cracks were beginning to show. Robert, once a vigorous man with an iron will, had been battling a terminal illness for over a year. The diagnosis had come as a shock. He had gone from boardroom triumphs to hospital visits, from the peak of his career to a man confined to his bed for most of the day. His energy waned, and his sharp mind dulled by the sheer weight of his condition. Despite his wealth and resources, no cure could save him. Lillian, at first, had played the role of the devoted wife. She attended doctor's appointments, held his hand during treatments, and ensured their home remained a sanctuary for his recovery. But as the months dragged on and Robert's condition worsened, her patience began to wear thin. The charm and vitality that had once drawn her to him were gone, replaced by a frail man who needed constant care. A growing distance. Lillian's discontent was subtle at first. She stopped sitting by Robert's side for long hours and excused herself from emotional conversations. The late-night talks that once defined their marriage had faded into silence. Instead, she filled her days with luncheons, charity events, and shopping sprees, leaving Robert in the care of nurses and aides. Robert noticed the change. He felt the absence of her warmth, the lack of her once effusive encouragement. But he said nothing. He told himself it was the illness, not Lillian, that was straining their marriage. He convinced himself that she needed these distractions to cope with the emotional toll of his condition. But deep down, he wondered if he was fooling himself. Enter Claire. It was during this period of emotional isolation that Claire entered their lives. A young woman in her late 20s, Claire was hired as a live-in caregiver for Robert. She had a calm demeanor, a ready smile, and an innate ability to make people feel at ease. Her references spoke highly of her compassion and professionalism, but nothing in her resume could capture the genuine kindness she exuded. From the moment Claire arrived, the atmosphere in the Whitmore household began to shift. She approached her role with sincerity, treating Robert not just as a patient, but as a person. She took the time to listen to his stories, asking about his life before the illness. She brought him books, played his favorite music, and even helped him tend to the small garden outside his room when he felt strong enough. Claire's presence was a balm to Robert's weary spirit. For the first time in months, he felt truly seen. Lillian's growing resentment. Lillian, however, was less than thrilled. At first, she was indifferent to Claire, viewing her as just another employee. But as she watched Claire grow closer to Robert, a pang of jealousy stirred within her. She dismissed it at first. Why should she, the wife, feel threatened by a mere caregiver? But the sight of Robert laughing at one of Claire's jokes or confiding in her about his fears filled Lillian with unease. She began to criticize Claire's every move. The tea wasn't brewed to her liking. The flowers in the vase were arranged poorly. The laundry wasn't folded the right way. Claire took the comments in stride, maintaining her professionalism, but Robert noticed. He tried to diffuse the tension, but his attempts only seemed to escalate Lillian's hostility. One evening, as Claire was leaving Robert's room, she overheard Lillian speaking on the phone. "I don't know how much longer I can take this. He's barely the man I married anymore. And now I have to deal with that woman hovering around him all the time. It's unbearable." Claire paused, her heart sinking. She had suspected Lillian's resentment, but hearing it so plainly left her shaken. She wondered if she should leave, spare herself the hostility. But one look at Robert, sitting quietly in his chair, his once strong hands trembling slightly, resolved her decision. He needed her, and she wasn't going to abandon him. A moment of clarity. Robert wasn't entirely oblivious to Lillian's feelings. He had spent enough years with her to read between the lines. He saw the way her eyes flickered with irritation when Claire entered the room. He heard the sharp edge in her voice when she spoke about the younger woman, and he noticed how she rarely spoke to him anymore unless it was about practical matters. One day, as Claire read to him from his favorite novel, Robert stopped her mid-sentence. "Claire," he said softly, his voice tinged with hesitation, "do you think I've been a good husband?" Claire looked at him, startled by the question. "I think you've done your best," she replied carefully. "Why do you ask?" He sighed, his gaze distant. "I wonder if Lillian feels like I failed her, if I've been more of a burden than a partner." Claire hesitated, unsure how to respond. She didn't want to speak ill of Lillian, but she also couldn't lie to him. "I think this situation has been hard on both of you," she said finally. "But I also think love shows itself in how we care for each other during the hard times." Robert nodded, her words sinking in. He didn't press further, but the conversation stayed with him. A fateful discovery. It wasn't long after that Robert stumbled upon something that would change everything. One afternoon, while Lillian was out and Claire was preparing his lunch, Robert's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from their financial advisor, detailing a transfer of a significant sum of money. Curious, Robert opened the email and saw a name he didn't recognize listed as the recipient. His brow furrowed. He called the advisor immediately. "Who authorized this transfer?" he asked, his voice sharper than it had been in months. There was a pause on the other end before the advisor replied. "Mrs. Whitmore. She said it was for an investment opportunity." Robert's heart sank. He hadn't been consulted about this transfer, one of many recent financial decisions Lillian had made without him. He felt a creeping sense of betrayal. How many other decisions had she made without him? How many other secrets was she keeping? That night, as he lay in bed, the weight of it all pressed down on him. The woman he had loved and trusted for years had grown distant, calculating, and yet, in his darkest moments, it was Claire, a stranger, who had shown him the care and compassion he so desperately needed. A quiet resolve. The following morning, Robert made a decision. He called his lawyer and requested a meeting. He didn't share the details with anyone, not even Claire. But as he signed the documents and sealed them in an envelope, a sense of clarity washed over him. He wasn't just preparing for his death. He was preparing to set things right. As the weeks passed, the tension in the Whitmore household continued to build. Lillian grew more irritable, Claire more cautious, and Robert more introspective. None of them knew that the choices being made in those quiet moments would soon come to light, shattering the delicate balance of their lives forever. The Whitmore estate, once a symbol of power and prosperity, had become a house filled with unspoken tension. Lillian's frequent absences, Claire's unwavering presence, and Robert's growing introspection created an atmosphere thick with uncertainty. Behind the grand marble walls, secrets lingered, waiting to surface. Robert's health continued to decline, but his resolve grew stronger. The lawyer's visit had set in motion a series of decisions that would alter the course of everyone's lives. Yet, he remained silent about the changes he had made to his will, biding his time as he observed the dynamics around him with growing clarity. Lillian's double life. Unbeknownst to Robert, Lillian's frequent trips were more than just a distraction from her husband's illness. While she claimed to be attending charity events and business functions, her outings had a far more personal agenda. Lillian had reconnected with an old acquaintance, a man named Victor Hall. Victor was suave, ambitious, and eager to exploit Lillian's dissatisfaction with her life. Their meetings began innocently enough, dinners to catch up, and conversations about shared interests. But as time passed, their connection deepened. Victor filled the emotional void Lillian felt, feeding her ego with compliments and promises of a more exciting future. He painted vivid pictures of a life free from Robert's shadow, a life where Lillian could be the center of attention once more. Victor wasn't just a smooth talker, he was also manipulative. He encouraged Lillian to secure her financial independence, subtly planting the idea that she needed access to Robert's wealth to ensure her future. Lillian, blinded by her growing feelings for Victor and her own discontent, began making decisions that she would later come to regret. Claire's discovery. Meanwhile, Claire's bond with Robert continued to grow. She saw in him a man burdened not just by his illness, but by a lifetime of responsibilities and unfulfilled dreams. Their conversations often drifted into deep reflections about life, love, and legacy. One afternoon, while tidying Robert's room, Claire stumbled upon a photograph tucked into one of his books. It was a candid shot of Robert and Lillian from their early days of marriage. The couple looked radiant, their smiles wide and genuine. But what struck Claire was the inscription on the back. "To my dearest Lillian, my reason for everything." The photo was a stark contrast to the tension she saw between them now. It made Claire wonder what had gone wrong. She resolved to learn more, not out of curiosity, but out of a desire to help Robert find peace in his remaining days. Later that evening, as Robert rested, Claire approached him gently. "Mr. Whitmore," she began hesitantly, "may I ask you something personal?" Robert, whose health had been deteriorating rapidly, opened his eyes and nodded. "Of course, Claire. You've earned the right to ask me anything." Claire hesitated, then held up the photograph. "I found this today. You and Mrs. Whitmore looked so happy. What happened?" Robert stared at the photo for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed. "Time happened, Claire. Time and choices. When we first married, Lillian was everything to me. She was my partner, my confidant, my anchor. But somewhere along the way, we lost each other." He paused, his voice tinged with regret. "I suppose I bear some of the blame. I got caught up in building my empire, chasing success. And Lillian, she drifted into a world that I didn't understand." Claire listened intently, her heart aching for the man who had clearly loved deeply, but had seen that love slip away. "Do you think things could have been different?" she asked softly. Robert smiled faintly. "Maybe. But life doesn't give us do-overs, does it?" The turning point. Days later, Claire noticed something odd. While organizing papers in Robert's study, she came across several financial statements. At first glance, they seemed normal, but a closer look revealed discrepancies, large sums of money transferred to unfamiliar accounts. Claire's instincts told her something wasn't right. She debated whether to say anything but ultimately decided to bring it up with Robert. "Mr. Whitmore," she began cautiously, "I noticed something in the financial statements. Have you approved all these transactions?" Robert's brow furrowed as he examined the papers. His expression darkened. "No, I haven't. These aren't my decisions." His mind raced as he pieced together the implications. Lillian had access to their finances, and the unexplained transfers could only mean one thing. She was acting without his consent. "Claire," he said firmly, "I need you to call my lawyer. Set up a meeting for tomorrow." Lillian's confrontation. That evening, Robert decided to confront Lillian. She returned home late, her face flushed from an evening out. The tension in the room was palpable as she entered Robert's study, where he sat waiting. "Lillian," he began, his voice calm but resolute, "we need to talk." She looked at him warily. "What about?" Robert held up the financial statements. "These. I want to know what's going on." Lillian's eyes flickered with panic before she quickly masked it with indignation. "I don't know what you're implying, Robert. Everything I've done has been for us. For our future." "For our future," Robert repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. "Or for yours?" Lillian's composure cracked. "Do you blame me for wanting some security? You've left me to deal with this nightmare alone. You don't know what it's like to watch everything we built fall apart." Robert stared at her, a mixture of sadness and anger in his eyes. "What we built, or what I built, while you reaped the rewards." The argument escalated, years of resentment spilling out like a dam breaking. But as the dust settled, one thing became clear. The chasm between them was too wide to bridge. A new plan. The next day, Robert met with his lawyer. The unexplained transactions confirmed his worst fears. Lillian was siphoning money for purposes he could only guess. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than he thought possible. "I want to make changes to my will," he told his lawyer. "Immediate changes." The lawyer hesitated. "Are you sure, Mr. Whitmore? This will create complications." "I'm sure," Robert replied. "I need to ensure that my legacy is preserved, not squandered." As the lawyer took notes, Robert added, "And there's one more thing. I want Claire to be taken care of. She's been more of a family to me than anyone else." The lawyer nodded. "I'll make the arrangements." Claire's growing role. As Robert's health declined further, Claire became his confidant in ways she never expected. He began to share not just his fears, but also his hopes for what little time he had left. They talked about his dreams of leaving behind a meaningful legacy, of making amends for past mistakes. One evening, as she helped him to bed, Robert looked at Claire with a rare intensity. "Claire, promise me something," he said. "Of course," she replied. "When I'm gone, don't let anyone make you feel small or undeserving. You've given me something money can't buy: kindness, dignity, and hope. Don't ever forget that." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I promise, Mr. Whitmore." The calm before the storm. The Whitmore household settled into an uneasy rhythm. Lillian continued her outings, unaware of the changes Robert had made to his will. Claire focused on her duties, finding solace in her growing friendship with Robert. And Robert, despite his failing health, felt a sense of quiet determination. But beneath the surface, the storm was brewing. The changes to Robert's will would soon come to light, setting the stage for a confrontation that would expose hidden truths and force everyone to face the consequences of their actions. The Whitmore household settled into a deceptive calm in the weeks following Robert's will revisions. Lillian continued her social engagements, blissfully unaware of the changes her husband had made to his estate plans. Claire, now a steady presence in Robert's life, remained focused on her role, but she couldn't shake the sense that something monumental was about to unfold. Robert, weakened but resolute, began reflecting on the legacy he wanted to leave behind. His physical strength had faded, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He spent hours in thought, poring over memories, regrets, and the few relationships that truly mattered. Lillian's dismissive attitude. Despite the growing distance between them, Lillian had convinced herself that she still held control over the situation. To her, Robert's weakened state made him irrelevant in the decisions that would shape her future. She continued her secretive rendezvous with Victor, using these moments to imagine a life unburdened by the man she had once loved. One morning, as Claire served Robert his breakfast, Lillian breezed into the room. Her expensive perfume wafted through the air, and her outfit, elegant but far too extravagant for a casual day, hinted at yet another outing. "Good morning," she said with feigned cheerfulness, glancing briefly at Robert. Her eyes didn't linger long, quickly darting toward Claire. The tension between the two women was palpable. "Good morning, Lillian," Robert replied, his tone measured. "Heading out again?" "Yes, just a luncheon with some old friends," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't wait up." Claire bit her lip, trying to focus on clearing the table. Robert's gaze followed Lillian as she left, his expression unreadable. Once the door closed, he sighed. "She doesn't even pretend anymore," he murmured. Claire hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Whitmore, I know it's not my place, but you deserve better." Robert looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "You're kind to say that, Claire, but life rarely gives us what we deserve." Robert's unfinished business. As the days passed, Robert grew increasingly preoccupied with the idea of closure. There was one piece of unfinished business that weighed heavily on his mind: his estranged relationship with his younger brother, James. They had fallen out years ago over a business disagreement, and though James had tried to mend the rift, Robert's pride had kept them apart. Late one night, unable to sleep, Robert asked Claire for a favor. "Would you help me write a letter?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Of course," Claire replied, pulling up a chair beside his bed. Robert took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "To my brother, James," he began, "it's been too long, and I know the fault lies with me. I let my pride get in the way of something far more important: family. If there's one thing this illness has taught me, it's that time is the most precious resource we have, and I regret wasting so much of it holding on to anger." As Claire wrote, Robert's voice grew steadier. "I hope you can forgive me. And if you're willing, I'd like to see you one last time." When the letter was finished, Claire promised to ensure it was delivered. Robert leaned back against his pillows, a flicker of relief in his tired eyes. The letter's impact. Claire mailed the letter the next morning, sending it by express courier to ensure James received it quickly. She didn't share the details with Robert, wanting to keep his hopes grounded. But within 2 days, a response arrived. James had written back in a scrawled but heartfelt note. "Dear Robert, I've waited years to hear these words from you, and though I wish it had come sooner, I'm grateful it came at all. Of course, I forgive you. Life is too short to hold grudges, and I'd be honored to see you again. Your brother, James." When Claire read the letter aloud, Robert's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in months, he felt a weight lift from his chest. "Thank you," he said to Claire, "for everything." Lillian's growing suspicion. Lillian, meanwhile, began noticing small changes that unsettled her. Robert's lawyer visited more frequently, and Claire seemed to be more involved in decisions regarding the household. Though she dismissed these observations as unimportant at first, a nagging doubt began to creep in. One evening, after returning from another outing with Victor, Lillian entered Robert's study. She found him poring over documents, his lawyer seated across from him. The two men stopped talking abruptly when she walked in. "What's this?" Lillian asked, her tone sharp. "Just some estate planning," Robert replied evenly. Lillian's eyes narrowed. "Why wasn't I informed?" Robert set down his pen and looked at her calmly. "Because you've made it clear that you're too busy with other matters." The barb struck a nerve. Lillian's face flushed, but she forced a smile. "Well, if it concerns our future, I'd like to be involved." "Our future," Robert said, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "Or just yours?" Before Lillian could respond, the lawyer stood, sensing the tension. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time," he said, excusing himself. As soon as the door closed, Lillian turned to Robert. "What are you trying to say?" Robert met her gaze, unflinching. "You know exactly what I'm saying, Lillian." James' arrival. A week later, James arrived at the Whitmore estate. Claire greeted him at the door, struck by how much he resembled Robert despite the years and the obvious differences in their personalities. James had a warm, approachable demeanor, a stark contrast to Robert's reserved nature. When James entered Robert's room, the brothers stared at each other for a moment, the silence heavy with unspoken emotions. Then James stepped forward and embraced Robert, the years of estrangement melting away in an instant. "I'm sorry," Robert whispered. "So am I," James replied. The two spent hours talking, reminiscing about their childhood and sharing stories of their lives. Claire watched from a distance, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had played a small role in bringing them back together, and it warmed her heart to see Robert at peace. Lillian's outburst. Lillian's reaction to James' arrival was less than gracious. She viewed his presence as an intrusion, another reminder that she was losing control. During dinner that evening, she couldn't hide her irritation. "It's so sudden, your visit," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "We weren't expecting guests." James, ever the diplomat, smiled politely. "Family should never need an invitation, don't you think?" Lillian's eyes flicked to Robert, her temper flaring. "Of course, but it's not every day we entertain people from the past." Robert's voice cut through the tension. "Enough, Lillian. James is here because I asked him to be. You'd do well to show some respect." Stung, Lillian fell silent, but her mind was racing. She resolved to dig deeper into what was happening behind the scenes. The hidden will. Determined to uncover the truth, Lillian began snooping through Robert's study late at night. She searched drawers, rifled through papers, and even attempted to access his computer. But Robert, anticipating her moves, had taken precautions. The documents she sought were locked away, accessible only to him and his lawyer. Frustrated, Lillian turned her attention to Claire, whom she viewed as the linchpin in this unfolding mystery. She began observing the young woman more closely, looking for any signs of duplicity, but what she found only deepened her unease. Claire wasn't a schemer. She was kind, selfless, and genuine in her care for Robert. This realization only made Lillian angrier. She couldn't understand how someone so unassuming had managed to gain so much of Robert's trust, and why he seemed to value Claire's loyalty over hers. The calm before the storm. As the days passed, the tension in the Whitmore household reached a breaking point. Lillian's attempts to assert control grew more desperate, while Robert quietly prepared for the inevitable fallout. Claire, caught in the middle, focused on her duties, sensing that the storm was about to break, but unsure of what her role would be when it did. Robert's health continued to decline, but his determination never wavered. He had made his decisions, and he was ready to face the consequences. What he didn't know was just how explosive those consequences would be. The Whitmore estate had become a pressure cooker, with secrets bubbling under the surface, waiting for the moment to boil over. Robert, confined mostly to his room, had grown quieter, but not weaker in spirit. His resolve to expose the truth and protect his legacy fueled him, even as his body grew frail. Lillian, increasingly desperate, sensed that something monumental was being withheld from her. She was accustomed to control, to knowing every detail of her life. But now, for the first time, she felt the ground beneath her shifting, and it terrified her. The unease morphed into suspicion, and the suspicion into anger. A glimpse of the truth. One morning, Lillian confronted Claire as the young woman was arranging a bouquet of fresh flowers for Robert's bedside table. "You've been spending a lot of time with my husband," Lillian began, her tone sharp and accusatory. Claire looked up, startled. "It's my job to care for him, Mrs. Whitmore." "Is that all it is?" Lillian pressed, stepping closer. "Because it seems to me that you've wormed your way into more than just his daily routine." Claire stiffened but maintained her composure. "Mr. Whitmore trusts me because I've been honest with him. Maybe that's something you should try." The words hit Lillian like a slap, but she refused to show it. Instead, she narrowed her eyes. "Honest, you say? Let's see how honest you are when the truth comes out." Claire didn't respond. Instead, she finished arranging the flowers and walked past Lillian, her heart pounding. She knew the confrontation was only the beginning. Robert's revelation. Later that day, Claire found Robert sitting by the window, gazing out at the sprawling gardens. He looked tired but serene, as though he'd made peace with what was to come. "Claire," he said softly as she approached, "I think it's time." "Time for what?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "For Lillian to know the truth," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I can't leave this world without confronting what's been left unsaid." Claire hesitated. She had grown to care for Robert deeply and knew how fragile he was. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Robert nodded. "I've spent my life avoiding difficult conversations. It's time I faced them, no matter the cost." The family dinner. That evening, Robert insisted on having dinner in the formal dining room. A rare occurrence in recent months. Claire helped him dress, ensuring he looked as dignified as ever despite his declining health. James joined them as well, his presence a reminder of the family bonds Robert was trying to repair. Lillian entered the room last, her sharp heels clicking against the polished floor. She was dressed impeccably, as always, but there was an edge to her demeanor, a mix of suspicion and defiance. Dinner began quietly, the clinking of silverware filling the strained silence. Finally, Robert set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady but solemn. "There's something I need to say." Lillian arched an eyebrow, her posture stiffening. "This sounds serious." "It is," Robert replied. He turned to James first. "I want to thank you for coming back into my life. I should have reached out years ago, but I let my pride get in the way. You've given me the chance to make things right, and I'm grateful." James nodded, his expression warm. "I'm just glad we have this time, Robert." Robert then shifted his gaze to Claire. "And you, Claire, you've been a light in my darkest days. Your kindness, your patience, you've reminded me of what it means to be truly cared for." Claire's eyes glistened with tears, but she said nothing, sensing that Robert had more to say. Finally, Robert looked at Lillian. "And then there's you, Lillian, my wife, my partner, and the person who has hurt me the most." The room fell silent. Lillian's face turned pale, but she quickly regained her composure. "What is this about, Robert?" she asked, her voice laced with a mix of fear and indignation. "This is about the truth," Robert replied. "About the choices you've made and the consequences they carry." Lillian's betrayal uncovered. Robert reached for a folder resting on the table and opened it, revealing copies of financial documents. "These are records of the transactions you authorized without my knowledge," he said, sliding the papers toward Lillian. Lillian's hands trembled as she picked up the documents. I was just trying to secure our future," she stammered. "Our future," Robert repeated, his voice rising. "Or yours? You've been siphoning money for months, Lillian. Don't insult me by pretending it was for us." Lillian's mask of composure shattered. "What was I supposed to do, Robert? Sit here and watch you waste away? I've been carrying the weight of this family alone while I what?" Robert interrupted, his tone cutting. "While I fought for my life. While I trusted you to stand by me as a partner, not a thief." Lillian's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of anger, not remorse. "You don't understand. You've never understood what it's like to feel trapped, to feel powerless." "Powerless," Robert said, his voice breaking. "You had power, Lillian. You had my trust, my love, my entire life built around you. And you threw it all away." The shocking announcement. As Lillian sat in stunned silence, Robert turned to James and Claire. "I've made changes to my will," he announced. "Everything I've built, everything I've earned, it's no longer hers." Lillian's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" Robert's expression was resolute. "I've left the majority of my estate to James and Claire. James, because he's my brother and because family should come first. And Claire, because she's shown me more loyalty and kindness in a year than you have in a lifetime." Lillian's face turned red with fury. "You can't do this. I'm your wife." "I can," Robert replied firmly. "And I have." The fallout. Lillian stormed out of the dining room, her heels echoing angrily against the floor. James watched her leave, shaking his head. "She'll contest it, you know," he said. "I know," Robert replied. "But the truth is on my side, and I'll fight for it as long as I can." Claire, still processing the weight of Robert's announcement, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "It's not about what I want," Robert said softly. "It's about what's right." The aftermath. The days that followed were tense. Lillian, now fully aware of her diminishing control, began making desperate attempts to salvage her position. She contacted lawyers, tried to discredit Claire, and even attempted to manipulate James, but her efforts only deepened the rift between her and the rest of the family. Robert, meanwhile, grew weaker but remained steadfast. He found solace in the relationships he had rebuilt and the legacy he was shaping. James became a constant presence, sharing stories and laughter that reminded Robert of their shared youth, and Claire continued to care for him with unwavering devotion. A quiet victory. One evening, As Robert lay in bed, he called Claire and James to his side. "I don't have much time left," he said, his voice faint but determined. "But I want you both to know that I'm at peace. I've made my decisions, and I don't regret them." James nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. "You've done the right thing, Robert. That's all that matters." Claire squeezed Robert's hand. "You've given me more than I could ever repay." Robert smiled faintly. "Just promise me one thing. Take care of each other. And don't let Lillian take away what we fought for." The calm after the storm. As the estate settled into an uneasy quiet, the storm of revelations left its mark on everyone involved. Lillian, isolated and embittered, faced the consequences of her actions. James and Claire, bound by their shared loyalty to Robert, became unlikely allies in protecting his legacy. And Robert, though his body failed him, passed away knowing he had reclaimed his life on his terms. The passing of Robert Whitmore marked the end of an era for the family and the beginning of a new chapter defined by the consequences of his final decisions. The news of his death spread quickly, drawing condolences from friends, business associates, and even distant relatives who had not been in contact for years. But within the walls of the Whitmore estate, the emotional storm that Robert had set in motion showed no signs of calming. The reading of the will. The tension in the room was palpable as Robert's lawyer, Mr. Grayson, prepared to read the will. Lillian sat stiffly in her chair, her expression carefully composed, but her mind racing. She still believed she could salvage the situation. Surely Robert wouldn't leave her with nothing. Across from her, James and Claire exchanged quiet glances, both uncertain about what the day would bring. Mr. Grayson cleared his throat and began. "This is the last will and testament of Robert Whitmore. As my final directive, I leave the following." Lillian leaned forward, her knuckles white, as she gripped the armrests of her chair. "To my brother, James Whitmore, I leave 40% of my estate, including my shares in Whitmore Enterprises. James, I trust you to continue the legacy we built together and to guide the company with integrity." James nodded, his face a mix of surprise and gratitude. "To Claire Henderson, I leave 30% of my estate. Claire, your kindness and dedication in my final days reminded me of the importance of compassion. Use this gift to pursue your dreams and help others, as you've helped me." Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had never expected such a gesture. Lillian's composure began to crack. "And what about me?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Mr. Grayson adjusted his glasses and continued. "To my wife, Lillian Whitmore, I leave my wedding ring and a trust fund sufficient to maintain the estate for the next 5 years." Lillian shot to her feet. "What? That's it? After everything I've done for him?" Mr. Grayson remained calm. Mr. Whitmore was very clear in his wishes. He believed this arrangement reflected his values and the relationships that mattered most to him. "You can't be serious," Lillian exclaimed, her voice rising. "I was his wife. I deserve more than a ring and a few years of upkeep." James interjected, his tone firm. "This isn't about what you think you deserve, Lillian. It's about what Robert thought was right." The aftermath. Lillian stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. For days, she avoided the others, retreating to her private quarters. The once confident socialite now faced a harsh reality. Her influence over Robert's life and legacy was gone. She reached out to her legal team, determined to contest the will. But the evidence Robert had meticulously gathered, financial records, witness testimonies, and even written statements from his lawyer, made her case nearly impossible to win. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of her actions, leaving her with little hope of reclaiming the life she had grown accustomed to. Meanwhile, James and Claire began navigating their new roles. For James, inheriting a significant portion of the estate and the company was both an honor and a responsibility. He worked closely with the board of Whitmore Enterprises, ensuring that Robert's vision for the company remained intact. His quiet leadership earned him the respect of employees who had admired Robert's legacy. Claire, on the other hand, faced a different kind of challenge. The inheritance Robert left her was life-changing, but she struggled with the weight of his trust. What would she do with such a gift? How could she honor his memory while staying true to herself? Claire's decision. For weeks, Claire reflected on Robert's final words to her. "Use this gift to pursue your dreams and help others, as you've helped me." She thought about her own journey, the struggle she had faced, the sacrifices she had made to become a caregiver. She realized that her purpose extended far beyond the walls of the Whitmore estate. With the help of James and a few trusted advisors, Claire established the Robert Whitmore Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing care and support for terminally ill patients and their families. The foundation offered resources, financial assistance, and emotional support, ensuring that no one facing the end of life would feel alone or abandoned. The foundation quickly gained recognition, drawing support from donors and volunteers who believed in its mission. For Claire, the work was deeply personal, a way to honor Robert's legacy and give back to others in need. Lillian's reckoning. As Claire and James moved forward, Lillian's life unraveled. Her attempts to contest the will drained her resources, leaving her financially and emotionally depleted. The social circles she once dominated began to distance themselves, wary of the scandal surrounding her behavior. One afternoon, she found herself alone in the grand dining room, staring at the opulent table that now felt like a monument to her losses. She thought back to the early days of her marriage, when she and Robert had shared laughter and dreams at that very table. How had it all gone so wrong? In a rare moment of introspection, Lillian admitted to herself that she had taken Robert for granted. She had let grief and resentment cloud her judgment, pushing away the man who had once adored her. But even as regret filled her heart, she couldn't bring herself to reach out to James or Claire. Pride held her back, leaving her isolated in her own bitterness. James and Claire's partnership. James and Claire grew closer in the months that followed, united by their shared goal of preserving Robert's legacy. They worked tirelessly to expand the foundation, creating programs that addressed the unique needs of patients and caregivers. Their partnership was built on mutual respect and a deep understanding of the values Robert had instilled in them. One evening, as they reviewed plans for a new hospice center funded by the foundation, James turned to Claire. "You know, Robert would be proud of you," he said. "You've done more than anyone to carry on his legacy." Claire smiled, her eyes glistening. "I couldn't have done it without you, James. This foundation is as much your work as it is mine." Their bond, forged in the crucible of loss and responsibility, became a testament to the enduring power of kindness and resilience. A community transformed. The impact of the Robert Whitmore Foundation extended far beyond the Whitmore family. The hospice centers and support programs it funded transformed communities, offering hope and comfort to countless individuals. Families who had once felt abandoned found solace in the foundation's resources, and patients facing their final days were treated with dignity and compassion. Claire often visited the hospice centers, speaking with patients and their families. She shared Robert's story, emphasizing the importance of love, forgiveness, and using one's resources to make a difference. Her humility and sincerity inspired others, turning the foundation into a beacon of hope, reflection, and redemption. As time passed, the wounds left by Robert's death began to heal. James found fulfillment in his role at Whitmore Enterprises, using his position to advocate for ethical business practices and community engagement. Claire continued to grow the foundation, finding purpose and joy in helping others. Even Lillian, after years of bitterness, began to change. She sold the estate, choosing to downsize and live a quieter life. Though she never fully reconciled with James or Claire, she found a measure of peace in her solitude. She spent her days volunteering at a local charity, perhaps seeking redemption in small acts of kindness. Robert's legacy lives on. Years later, on the anniversary of Robert's passing, James and Claire gathered with foundation staff, supporters, and beneficiaries to unveil a statue in his honor. The statue, placed in the garden of the Foundation's flagship hospice center, depicted Robert in a moment of quiet reflection, a symbol of the compassion and integrity he had come to represent. As the crowd stood in silence, Claire stepped forward to speak. Robert Whitmore taught us that life is not measured by wealth or power, but by the impact we have on others. His generosity and kindness changed my life, and through this foundation, his legacy will continue to change countless more. The crowd erupted into applause, a testament to the man whose final days had inspired a movement of compassion and hope. As the years passed, the impact of Robert Whitmore's life, and the choices he made in his final days, continued to ripple outward. His name, once synonymous with business acumen and power, became a symbol of compassion, transformation, and second chances. For James, Claire, and even Lillian, his legacy left an indelible mark that shaped their paths in unexpected ways. Claire's journey, a life transformed. After the unveiling of Robert's statue, Claire found herself reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. The shy, unassuming caregiver who had walked into the Whitmore estate years ago could never have imagined the journey that lay ahead. The Robert Whitmore Foundation, which she now led, had become her life's work, and its success was a testament to the values she and Robert had shared. Under Claire's leadership, the foundation expanded its reach, opening hospice centers across the country and even abroad. These centers were not just places of care but sanctuaries of hope. Each one bore Robert's name and reflected his belief that every life, no matter how brief or burdened, deserved dignity and love. Claire became a sought-after speaker at conferences and charitable events, where she shared Robert's story and her own transformation. Though she was often in the spotlight, she remained humble, always emphasizing the collective effort behind the foundation's achievements. One evening, after a particularly moving event, Claire sat alone in her office, looking at a photograph of herself with Robert. "I hope I've made you proud," she whispered. Though the room was silent, she felt a sense of peace, as if Robert's presence was still guiding her. James, building on a legacy. James, too, found himself profoundly changed by his brother's final acts. Taking the helm of Whitmore Enterprises was no small task, but James approached it with the same integrity and determination that had defined Robert's career. He focused on modernizing the company, implementing ethical business practices, and giving back to the community. Under his leadership, the company established scholarships, funded local infrastructure projects, and partnered with the Robert Whitmore Foundation to support healthcare initiatives. Employees, inspired by the company's new direction, took pride in their work, and Whitmore Enterprises flourished in ways that went beyond profits. James often visited the foundation's centers, connecting with patients and their families. These visits reminded him of why he had reconciled with Robert and why he was committed to honoring his brother's memory. One day, as he walked through one of the hospice gardens, a young girl approached him. She was no more than 10, her hair tied in neat braids. "Are you Mr. James Whitmore?" she asked. "Yes, I am," he replied, kneeling to her level. "My daddy says your brother helped us. He says we wouldn't have made it without him." James felt a lump in his throat. "Your daddy's right. My brother believed in helping people, and I'm glad he could help your family." The girl smiled, her eyes shining. "Thank you for keeping his promise." In that moment, James felt the weight of his responsibilities, but also the immense gratitude that came with fulfilling Robert's legacy. Lillian's quiet redemption. For Lillian, life after Robert's death was a slow, painful reckoning. Selling the Whitmore estate marked the end of an era, and she moved into a modest home on the outskirts of the city. Her once busy social calendar was now empty, and the friends who had flocked to her during her days of wealth and influence were nowhere to be found. At first, Lillian resented the solitude. She blamed Robert, Claire, and even James for her downfall, unable to see her own role in the unraveling of her life. But as time passed, she began to confront the truth. Sitting alone in her small living room, surrounded by relics of her past, she realized that her bitterness had only served to isolate her further. One day, while walking through a local park, Lillian overheard a conversation between two women discussing a nearby community center that offered programs for underprivileged families. On a whim, she decided to visit. The center was bustling with activity, children laughing, volunteers distributing meals, and staff running workshops. It was a stark contrast to the hollow opulence of the world she had once known. Something about the atmosphere struck a chord in Lillian. She approached the center's director and asked if they needed volunteers. The director, unaware of Lillian's past, welcomed her warmly. "We can always use an extra pair of hands," she said. At first, Lillian's contributions were small, organizing donations, serving meals, and helping with administrative tasks. But as she immersed herself in the work, she began to feel a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. The gratitude of the people she served reminded her of the kindness she had once taken for granted. Over time, Lillian became a fixture at the center, earning the respect of staff and visitors alike. Though she never reconciled with James or Claire, she quietly followed their work, taking solace in knowing that Robert's legacy was in good hands. The Foundation's global impact. As the Robert Whitmore Foundation continued to grow, its reach extended beyond hospice care. Claire spearheaded initiatives to address systemic healthcare inequalities, focusing on communities that had long been underserved. Mobile clinics, mental health programs, and caregiver support networks became integral parts of the Foundation's work. One of the most ambitious projects was the construction of a state-of-the-art hospital in a rural area that had previously lacked access to quality healthcare. The hospital, named the Whitmore Center for Compassionate Care, was a beacon of hope for the region. At its grand opening, Claire addressed the crowd with her characteristic humility. "This hospital is not just a building," she said. "It's a promise that no one will be forgotten, no matter where they come from or what challenges they face." Robert Whitmore believed in that promise, and today we make it a reality. The event was attended by dignitaries, healthcare professionals, and families whose lives had been touched by the Foundation. For Claire, it was a reminder that one person's kindness could create ripples that spanned generations. A reunion of hearts. Though Lillian had remained distant from James and Claire, fate had other plans. On a quiet spring morning, as Claire was visiting a community center supported by the Foundation, she spotted a familiar figure in the crowd. Lillian, dressed simply and with a humility Claire had never seen before, was helping distribute food to a line of families. For a moment, Claire hesitated. She wasn't sure how Lillian would react to seeing her, but as their eyes met, something shifted. Lillian offered a tentative smile, and Claire, after a brief pause, returned it. The two women didn't speak that day, but the exchange marked the beginning of a fragile understanding. Over the months that followed, they crossed paths occasionally, each time exchanging polite words and small gestures of kindness. While their relationship never fully healed, there was a quiet acknowledgement of the shared bond they had with Robert. The enduring legacy. Years after Robert's passing, his memory remained alive in the lives he had touched. The Foundation continued to thrive, its work expanding to address new challenges and opportunities. The company James led became a model of ethical business practices, proving that success and integrity could coexist. And though Lillian's life had taken a very different path, she found a measure of peace in her work at the community center. The woman who had once lived for wealth and status now found fulfillment in helping others. On what would have been Robert's 75th birthday, the Foundation held a special event to honor his legacy. People from all walks of life gathered to celebrate the man who had taught them the power of kindness, resilience, and redemption. As Claire stood on the stage, looking out at the crowd, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Robert Whitmore believed that every life has value, she said. Today, we honor him by continuing to carry that belief forward. Let us never forget that one act of kindness can change the world. The audience erupted into applause, a fitting tribute to the man whose life and death had inspired a legacy of love.